being tear gassed and beaten by the very institution that they thought was supposed to take care of them. It's very jarring, but also an important experience for people.
Definitely. I mean, I know we jumped right into things, but
Yeah.
we haven't met before. It's really nice to meet you, even virtually.
Yeah.
Would you mind taking a second and just giving a little background on who you are and what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So, hello, everybody. My name is Maxwell Frost. I'm an organizer. I work in movement building. Right now, I work for March for Our Lives. I'm the national organizing director. But I've been working in politics and organizing for the past 6 years. I graduated high school and went straight to work for Bernie um, because he inspired me. And I put my college on pause, and I was like, you know what? Like, I'll get right back to it after Bernie. And then Bernie lost, and then I went to work for Hillary, and I was like, right after November, right back to school. And so right after Hillary, I got another offer for another job. And so what I decided to do was do my college online. And so for about 5 years, I was doing college online and just traveling the country and working on different campaigns. I got to a point where I was like, you know what, I'm campaigns are fun, but I'm ready to like, I want to work in movement building. I want to work on issue advocacy. So then I started working for the ACLU, and I was there for about 2 years. The biggest thing I've ever done in my life was actually in the ACLU, where I was helping to run our field operations for Amendment 4, which was the ballot referendum to get people the right to vote in Florida. And so that I always say that's the biggest thing I've done in my life so far. And so I worked at ACLU for 2 years, and then now I'm at March for Our Lives. And so that's me in a nutshell. I also play the drums, actually, and in my
Excellent.
yeah, and I went to arts high school, and I was gonna be a jazz drummer, but everything changed. Um, and I actually work for a few music festivals in my in some off time. I used a lot of my free time to go work at festivals and work for Golden Voice and stuff like that. So I love music. I always tell like my organizers that like I don't believe artivism is separate from activism. I think they're one and the same. I'm a big nerd, so I read a lot, and just knowing that in the civil rights era, like the food, the culture, the music that these individuals went home to after a long day of fighting for their rights fueled that fire just as much as anything else. And so like art, culture, food, all of that is integral to like fighting for rights and fighting for against oppression.
Yeah, it's something that we talk about a lot in the music industry. Is it an artist's responsibility to say something about the current political climate, or is it an artist's choice to participate in it or not? And no matter what, I feel like any music or art that's created during this time is going to be influenced by the climate. But what do you think? Is it a responsibility or is it a choice?
You know, I'll be honest, my answer changes on that a lot. I think it really depends on the artists themselves and who they've made themselves out to be at first, right? So like, um do I expect Trippy Red to come out and say something? Not necessarily, right? Because just because of the way he's poised himself, and nothing against Trippy Red, right? Like I love listening to his music. Um, but would I expect J. Cole to come out and say something? Probably, right? Because he's been in these circles before. Would I expect AJR to say something? Yeah, probably, right? Because they've been in circles before. And so I'm really like, I think it's incumbent upon any human to stand against justice, no matter whether they're famous or not. Stand against injustice.
Mhm.
As far as artists are concerned, I think a lot of times we forget how much joy that someone's art can bring, like someone that's on the front line. So for me, like I've been like listening to a lot of Solange and a lot of a band called Phony People, and like the songs aren't necessarily like it's not like Kendrick Lamar talking about oppression in and of itself, but it's bringing me joy and a lot of other people joy that are fighting it as well. So I don't want to discount that, but to answer your
Yeah.
question, yes, I think it's any human's responsibility to speak out against injustice. But I look a little deeper. Like I look at like the art they're doing, and I want to appreciate the fact that they're contributing.
Absolutely. Um, so your work with March for Our Lives is national organizing director. What have you taken from that role to apply to the current protests with the Black Lives Matter movement that are happening right now?
Yeah, definitely. So in March for Our Lives, there we had an honest conversation saying, where's our place in this movement going on right now, right? Because like we're not a predominant we have a lot of black and brown organizers, but we're not like, Black Lives Matter or anything like that,
Mhm.
right? So we wanted to make sure we weren't working to co-opt the movement or anything like that. We wanted to support. And so what we decided to do is support digitally and give young people a place to come and advocate to divert funding from police departments to like communities and community violence intervention. So we've been phone banking every night, and so anyone can like join March for Our Lives and phone bank. We've done over 10,000 calls in like 5 days, and what we're doing is we're calling into cities and demanding that funding be moved from policing to community programs, and that's been our place so far. We've also been providing resources and money to the organizations doing things on the ground. So that's like what March for Our Lives has been doing, and I'm really happy with that because like at the same time I am also an organizer on the ground at the protest doing that as well as the organizing director, but also my personal capacity is just a guy from Orlando who's an organizer. And so, when I sit back and I think, what would I want a big national organization to do to help me? Give me money and push my agenda, and that's exactly what we're doing, and I'm really happy about it.
Yeah. Do you think any of the work you're doing now as an organizer and participant in the Black Lives Matter movement, you're going to be able to take back and use in your work for March for Our Lives for the next
Yeah.
round of fighting to get people to vote and to get people to fight for gun sense legislation?
Yeah, for sure. And like something that, I've been thinking a lot about recently is, we're getting to a point, not now, but soon, where we're going to switch into what we call GOTV, which is get out the vote, which is like we need to get people to go vote. And like what I'm always telling people, and I actually had an interview this morning where I was explaining that like Gen Z is different, right? It might have worked for other generations to say go vote, go vote, go vote. Uh, it's not going to be enough to say go vote because of Trump, right? People, especially young people, we're going to have to say, go vote for this future. Go vote for this vision of America. And that's what, that we're kind of coining this term generational identity, right? That's the generational identity of Gen Z. It's, defunding police, giving to community programs. It's ending deportations. It's abolishing ICE. It's changing prisons. There's a lot of different, a Green New Deal, ending gun violence, right? It's like this whole book of policies that like we can really attribute to young folks and what they want the world to look like. And I think it's a righteous anger. Like we're righteously pissed off that this is the world that we think can be best for everybody, and we're just pissed that we're not living in it right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, so I think that's why people like Bernie Sanders really speak to young folks because Bernie's good at going up on stage and painting verbally a picture of what the world can look like. And for young people to hear that from an older person, it's like, he gets it. You know what I mean? And so
Yeah.
March for we pivot to like getting people to vote. I just want to ensure we're not just saying go vote. I want to ensure that we're first starting with here are the injustices. Here's what the world can look like. Let's vote to make that happen. Let's not just vote against Trump. Let's vote for like a good future.
So people like Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang have developed this kind of cult following, but also the energy that Gen Zs are really looking for in painting this future, like you're saying. How do you think we can get people to stand behind Joe Biden when he's not painting the kind of future that these other candidates were that really get Gen Zs excited?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, when it became that Joe Biden was the presumptive nominee, I said to my organizers, I was like, look, this isn't the best news for like young people in general, but what I will say is it makes our jobs harder as like people who are leading the youth movement, but it makes it all the more that important, right? Because we do need to get Trump out of office point blank. And so I think it's going to be hard, but I think the first thing we need to do is work to build credibility as organizers and as people within the youth circles and make sure that people understand that we understand your objections to Joe Biden, right? Like they're super valid.
Mhm.
And so we want people to understand that March for Our Lives, like we've called out Joe Biden on a few things. We actually signed a letter with a ton of organizations, Sunrise, with a list of demands saying, congratulations on being the presumptive nominee. But these are things that young people want, and you need the young vote, right? And so I think first we work with young people on like demanding things, and then we
Mhm.
take those wins and we say, hey, look, these are the wins we've got. We've moved them to a certain place, and hopefully this will push young people to go out and vote. March for Our Lives, we're not endorsing any candidate, but we can say without a doubt that like there's one candidate that's better on gun violence prevention than the other. So I think it's going to be the issues this time around. It's not going to be the candidate, right? Like for Obama, people went to go vote for Obama. For this time, I think um, people are going to go to vote against racism or for a specific future, and they'll understand that, like, you know, Trump is not the person to put that future into fruition, and Joe Biden, quite frankly, probably isn't either. But way more than Trump, and so I think that's like what we're looking to do.
Yes, definitely. Um, how do you feel the protests so far have done in bridging the gap between, activism as going out and joining a protest and holding a sign that says Black Lives Matter versus making incremental or large steps of change? Because, in Minneapolis, we've seen some change, and some of the change looks like it's going to be good. We don't know if it's going to be great yet. LA has diverted a bunch of the funds, but it is still a very small percentage. New York has made, some claims that some money is going to go somewhere
Yeah,
else and away from police departments. We don't really know what the results are, but how do you feel the success of the protests? Well, do you feel like the protests are successful so far?
I do, and I think a lot about movement history and what these moments do for countries and people, and like I think they do spark legislative change. I think it's never as big or as much as people would like, and I think that's always a jarring factor, right? You go out for the first time, you protest for 3 weeks straight, you get something, it's not as much as you wanted, and sometimes that in and of itself pisses people off, and they hate politics after that. And like I hate politics, to be honest, right? Like it sucks, right?
Yeah.
But like why can't we just do the right thing? But what it is, oh, and someone just put a comment here, yeah, that I agree with. They said it's a rallying point, and that's what I'm trying to get to is like these moments radicalize a lot of people in a short amount of time. And when I talk about radicalize, I mean the process in which someone realizes that the world is really messed up for a lot of people, and they realize how all of our issues are connected. And typically, when you're radicalized, it's a hard process. It's There's a lot of emotions that go on. You get pissed. You're sad.
Mhm.
You're depressed. You're anxious. It does a lot to you, right? I remember when I started reading and figuring out about all this because I used to just be when I was in high school, like the your high school Democrats guy, right?
Yes.
Like Dems are always good, right? But as I moved on and read and became a bit more radicalized, and someone I read a lot of is Cornel West and Angela Davis and Audre Lorde and people like this. I realized that wow, everything's so messed up and there's so much to do. And so moments like this in history, I think, push people through that process quickly, and a lot at the same time, which is good because it creates a culture change. And so, like things like the March on Washington with MLK, what's the best thing that came from that? I think it was the culture change and shedding light on a problem to a lot of people. And as years passed, we got some substantive legislative change, which changed the world. But I think right now what we're seeing is a moment, and we'll see the fruits of this moment in the next 5 to 10 years when people start running for office because they went to a protest and it changed their life. When people start voting because they went to a protest and it changed their life. And so I think I don't think police are going to be abolished this year, but I think that this pushing that forward. There's a J. Cole lyric, slow, always has been, always will be. And it's true. Change is slow. But moments like this, I think, accelerate us a little bit more. Like March for Our Lives, I think it radicalized a lot of people real quick. And that's what we're seeing right now.
Yeah. A lot of the activism and advocacy work that I do on a day-to-day basis, even before the Black Lives Matter movement gained all of this momentum in the last couple of weeks, has been in the sustainability and human rights space. I'm almost done with my PhD in the relationship between
Oh,
sustainability and human rights. and I do a lot of work with the UN helping to amplify their goals about sustainability and climate change. It's been such a difficult kind of an interesting conversation that's been happening at all different levels. How do you continue to talk about all of these other issues that are happening in the world that are incredibly important at the same time as we absolutely need to stand up and say Black Lives Matter and make the change here? There are still fires in Australia. The rainforest is still being destroyed in Brazil. There are children still in cages at the border. It's a difficult balance to strike because in some ways people are going to come back and say, no, you can't talk about anything else. Right now we're fighting for Black Lives Matter. And I'm not discounting. I'm saying that absolutely we need to be fighting for Black Lives Matter, but we need to understand that a lot of these things are interconnected. The systems that we have in place have allowed all of these things to happen simultaneously and grow over time. So, I mean, I don't know if there's really a question in there, but I guess the question would be, your organization, March for Our Lives, is advocating for something that is related but slightly different from Black Lives Matter. How do you continue to have both conversations at the same time?
Yeah. So I think, and I think the question gets down to another question that we talk a lot about in organizing, which is like, what's the best way to speak with people about issues they don't care about? You know what I mean? Or they might not like know much about. And I always think the first thing is meeting people where they are. And so I think the country's at a certain place right now. We want to talk about Black Lives Matter. We want to talk about race. And so you and I know this. Race is white supremacy is deeply embedded in every issue there is in this country. Economic, environmentally for sure, right? And so we can go through and talk about those things through the lens that the country wants to see it through right now. And that's what we've been doing. So for instance, we fight for gun violence prevention, and obviously gun violence disproportionately affects people of color and even more Black people specifically. And so what we're doing is we're telling our folks and we're educating folks about community violence interruption organizations. Like, what is that? People don't know what that is. And there's literally organizations that go out, they have what are called violence interrupters, and they go out in communities and they use a localized approach to end gun violence. They track who's more at risk of committing gun violence or being killed by a gun, and they go in and they personally intervene. And it's crazy, but it stops gun violence by record amounts in localities, specifically Black communities. So what we're fighting right now is we're saying, where's the intersection? These community groups end gun violence. That's our mission. Right now, the country is talking about Black Lives Matter because they do. And these community groups disproportionately save Black lives. So what we're doing is we're saying we need to take funds from the police department and divest them and give them to these Black and brown organizations that are saving Black lives every day. Boom, that's Black Lives Matter and gun violence prevention. And so I see Sunrise doing like very similar things, and like it's important. They're saying, yes, Black Lives Matter. Black people are disproportionately affected by the climate crisis that's going on right
Yeah.
now. We also have to understand that Black people are also completely affected by colonialism, and colonialism is the reason why we have the climate crisis in the first place.
Yeah.
And getting into this whole radicalization thing, but that's why it's so important. We're teaching people and educating people on why everything is so, excuse my French, effed up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's all effed up.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that's what I would say, man, is drawing that connection. Emma Gonzalez, she gave the speech, and she's amazing. And like one time I was at her house and she wanted to show me something in her room, and I went in her room and she has, I think she calls it the web wall or the wall of everything, but it's literally on her wall. I don't know if she wants me to talk about this, but it's too late. has like she has like the names of every issue you can think of all around her wall, and then has like string connecting the issues, and they're all connected. And so you walk in and it's like something out of a movie. It's like all these, they're just all connected, and it's really beautiful, and I think it's like a good visual representation about what's going on right now.
That's so right on point. I mean, my academic work is all about Indigenous communities affected by the climate crisis, specifically large-scale development projects. And large-scale development projects, I mean, we see it in the US, but my focus is on Bangladesh and Kenya and Canada, because they are bringing in great clean energy projects, like amazing clean energy projects that are going to bring new and clean electricity to millions and millions of people. But at the same time, they're kicking thousands and hundreds of thousands of indigenous people off of their land, kicking them out of their homes, contaminating the water supply, destroying the local workforce. So you're so right. There are every single issue is connected, and so much of it does have to do with the economic and political issues in the global north. It is such a big problem.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up indigenous folks because that is like at the core of a lot of my organizing too. It's like, you know, a lot of people, and this might be a little controversial for folks here, but a lot of people say that the original sin is slavery of the United States. You've heard that before, that phrase? And something Cornell West says that I wholeheartedly agree with is it's not the original sin. The original sin is what we did to the indigenous people that were on this land. And I think it's important that we know that because we don't say that to negate slavery, obviously, but we got to understand and recognize the humanity of all oppressed people and recognize that we're all foreigners on this land and that what we did to indigenous people. And I actually spent, I worked for Bernie again on this cycle, but doing events, just planning events, which was a dream for a few months. But I got to spend about a week on the Meskwaki tribe settlement in Iowa. And it completely changed my life. Her name was Donnelly, and she gave me tours and just taught to me about her settlement and how settlements are different than reservations. And for folks who don't know, settlements are the tribe bought the land from the government, and then reservations where the government gave the land. And so there's a sense of pride in a tribe buying their own land, but it's also so messed up that we killed them, stole their land, and made them buy it again. Yeah. And either way, we were walking through the high school, and she was talking about how strict the high school is, and I was like, oh wow, that's crazy. I thought my school was bad. And she was like, yeah, but understand, it's more than just about being strict. It's like if we don't impart the lessons of our culture and impart this in our youth, it'll be lost forever. Forever. Yeah. And yeah, we can talk about that forever, but that's some heavy stuff, and I think it's important that we all understand that, and everything going on right now.
Absolutely. When I was preparing, I have two other questions for you. The first one is one that I've been thinking a lot about, and you can speak to it, I'm sure, from the current protests that are going on and also March for Our Lives. What role do you think anger plays in protests? And anger is something that is temporary. How do we keep the anger going if it's something that is valuable? And how do we curb the anger if it's something that you don't think is valuable?
Yeah, definitely. That's a good question. I think everyone comes to the table for a different reason. And so I think right now it's anger for a lot of folks in the country. Sometimes it's, there's someone named Millicent who I know from South Carolina. She was one of the founders of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. They did the Montgomery bus, the bus ride, the freedom rides. And so she told me she joined SNCC. She went to SNCC the first meeting because she wanted to impress a boy. And so now she's a lifelong, she is a legend, right? And so I always think about that. And, as a young organizer, I always thought, if you're here to make friends, you need to leave. If you're here to do this, you need to leave, right? I always thought there was a certain reason people have to be there. And now I'm so accepting of anyone for anything because it's up to us as movement builders to meet people where they are and mold and morph them into lifelong advocates for justice, no matter if they came for friends or just because there was free pizza or whatever the hell, right? They came, and that's what matters. When it comes to anger, I think anger is such an important emotion because I think it invokes some of the worst, but also some of the best in humanity as far as righteous anger is concerned. And I think being angry about injustice is an amazing thing. And I think that's what we're seeing around the world. People are coming together. But what I want to do as an organizer is work with folks through this process of them being angry and change it from a righteous anger to a radical love. And so instead of just hating the problem, which we need to do, and a lot of people come to this in that way, they hate the problem, but they love the people that are being oppressed more than they hate the oppressor, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
And like, I'm not trying to get all. I really hope it doesn't sound like I'm trying to get all like psychological and deep with folks, but I think it's important because the anger, like you said, fizzes out, and
Hmm.
that's how it fizz out. Anger fizzes out really quick. You can only be mad for so long, but we're trained to love people our whole lives through our culture. I mean, think about family, think about marriage. Like, there's different things like this in our lives that we're used to loving longer than we're used to hating. Like, holding a grudge is a lot. And so I try, like, and it's hard to do this on a large scale, and that's why like movement leaders are important, like Emma or Greta and people like this, because they can spread this message out to a lot of people, and people like you have like large platforms with your music. But I think as like the more we can take this righteous anger and move it to a radical love, the longer people will fight for justice. And obviously we need people to fight as long as they can.
Yeah. No, that was a great answer. It's interesting. We've been watching the protests go by our window every single day since this started. And we were trying to figure out a way to participate beyond going and standing and marching in the protests. And like even out the window, we saw the liquor store right outside our building get completely demolished. We saw our supermarket that we go to, all the windows were smashed in. And then some days it's completely peaceful protests. So my girlfriend came up with this idea to kind of bridge the two, the passion of people out protesting and this idea of asking for concrete change, because we've spoken to a lot of people across the country who feel like they want to do something. So they go out and protest, but they don't really know what they're asking for. They don't know what kind of specific change they're asking for. So she came up with this thing that we've been kind of spreading around the country. It's called Smart Signs. And basically she's been paying for signs that get made at Staples all over the place. And each one has a giant QR code on it. If you scan the QR code, an automatically written email pops up with automatically addressed to every single assemblyman, council member, everybody, asking for the specific change for that specific city. So all
Wow.
the people now that are protesting and walking around, they are able to actually make change with just one click and one thing in their camera. So
Feel that.
yeah, I mean, I'll send you the link to it. So
Yeah.
people can just print them out themselves too. It's super easy. But we've been thinking a lot about the making the leap between the two, because we see it outside our window. We see it on the streets that we're walking on every single day. And for us, it's about taking that next step. So all of these emails that are being sent, the incremental change that we're seeing, what would you consider a win in the short term, and what would you consider a win in the long term for the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah. I think I'll start I think in the short term, I think it's going to be getting some substantial funding diverted to social services in cities across the nation. And like you said, it's small in a lot of places, but even if we divert a fraction of police funding, and as you know, like these police departments have crazy amounts of funding, it can really make big differences for social services and violence inter. One second, Cooper. Sorry, my dog's crying. Um, Sometimes he just needs a little like loud noise from my voice, and then he'll stop. But if we can do that across the nation, I think it's going to make some big differences right now in the immediate. It might not be as radical as a lot of other folks think, and I am a super leftist, but I'm just thinking of realistically, what are some wins we can get that can push people to continue. I think in the long term, like I told you before, I think I want everyone to be radicalized, and I want their anger to turn into love, and I want them to like hold lifelong convictions to fight for justice. And it's going to look different for everybody, right? I think like if 90% of the people just go on in their life knowing the information and understanding how everything's connected and understanding how white supremacy is injected in our government, I think they're going to vote better, they're going to go out and volunteer more, and they're going to be better human beings. And I think that in and of itself is a culture change, which propels the 10% of people, or I forgot what percentage I gave you, but if it's 90 and 10, the 10% of people who want to do a little bit more, maybe they want it to be their career, maybe they want to study it, maybe they want to run for office or work for someone in office, those folks, they need that wind behind their sails, if you will, to like implement this change. And I want to be clear. I'm not saying that the 10% are better people morally or anything like that than the 90%. Like at the end of the day, being an organizer and like running for office is a job. Like being a musician is a job that's important to our world and culture. Like cooking food's an important job to our
Mhm.
culture. And so I'm
We
not
know
saying,
that now more than ever through COVID.
yeah, right, exactly.
Yeah.
Like I've always been a foodie, but I am, and like I've been like binging Chopped with my girlfriend, but I am so ready to go out and just eat some amazing food. You know, there's a scene, not to get too off topic, but there's a scene, you've seen Ratatouille?
Yeah, yeah.
The scene in Ratatouille, it makes me cry every time actually, is when that critic guy who's like a complete dick, he takes a bite of the food and then it transports him back to like his mother. And if you
Yeah.
think how deep that moment is, not I hate to sound like a guy who's like trying to think deep about everything, but this moment gets me a lot. If you think about it, his mom's probably dead at that time. So it's literally making him think about someone who's no longer in his life in a moment that he probably misses. And like food can do that, music can do that. So if you're a cook out there, if you're a chef, if you're a musician, please keep doing it because those moments, man, I always tell people like when I'm like in the rain, like this there was a few days ago, it was really hard. We had a lot of tear gas out and it was really hard. I have a plan in my head and I have a song in my heart at all
Mm.
times. Song going on. And so it's so important. I'm sorry, I went completely off topic.
No, I
Uh,
love it.
Long term, I just want people to be good human beings. And I think movements like this just make people better. And I think that's the best thing we can get out of these moments. I think that's what March for Our Lives did. I think it just, boom, educated a lot of society at the same time. And I think this is educating a lot of people at the same time as well.
Last thing, how do we get involved in the March for Our Lives book club? That looks
Oh,
amazing.
yeah. Okay, so if you want to get in our book, get involved in a book club, it's called Poetic Justice. It is so awesome. It's run by two of our organizers, Lene and Vickiana. And what they do is they go through a book, and if you can't afford the book, we usually have PDF versions, or we try to buy it for people as well. But pretty much, it's just all radical, revolutionary text. And right now, we're focusing on like Black and Brown folks. So it's really exciting. But if you go to marchforourlives.com, you can sign up there. I also have a link that people can fill out. And I know I can't really link things in this, but what I'll do is, and I'm not trying to like get followers, but like if you want to go to my profile, I'll put the form link in my bio
Perfect.
and sign up there to be a part of Poetic Justice. But you can also, like, I would say, just follow March for Our Lives on our social media, and we're always posting about it there. But we'd love you to join if you want to join the book club.
That would be
Oh, I
awesome.
think you know Linnea.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
She's amazing.
yeah, Linnea is amazing. Yeah,
Yeah,
so
yeah. Well, is there anything else that you want to share that you want to tell the people that are watching and listening?
yeah, I echo like getting involved, and even if it's not March for Our Lives, there's a lot of great organizations out there. Also, like if you can't go out and protest, that's okay. COVID's still a thing right now. There's folks that are high risks, and we understand that. March for Our Lives, we're doing phone banks for folks. So if you can't donate, you can phone bank with us. There's a lot of other organizations doing phone bank. Sunrise, they're phone banking. And so get involved any way you can, and just fighting for justice your whole life doesn't have to look like being on the trenches every day.
Mhm.
It's little decisions that you make, whether it's calling out a friend on a joke that's messed up, whether it's um, thinking about, I want to say it's like thinking about everything, right? Like just if you're leading a march and there's people that are disabled in the crowd, maybe you want to walk a little slower. It's like little things like that, that just standing up for folks who not everyone's always thinking about. Just try your best to think about them. That's all I can say.
Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. It's been a great conversation. Thanks for inviting me to
Yeah.
this.
No,
Awesome.
thank you for taking the time today. I'm gonna post on my Instagram so more people will be able to watch it who aren't available right now. But
Awesome.
yeah, definitely go follow you on Instagram. What's your handle?
My handle is at Frosty Max,
At
F R
Max.
Y M A X, because my name is Maxwell Frost. Uh,
I'll put it in the
but
caption too.
and fun fact, I actually saw y'all live 2000 and I forgot what it was, but it was like a radio show in Tampa.
Oh, yeah.
Next big thing.
We'll have to throw you on the list next time we come back if touring like that happens within the next, couple of years. We'll see.
Hopefully. I don't think this year, right? But
Probably not.
yeah, but hopefully soon. I need the concerts.
Amazing. Well, be safe. Thank you so much for sharing all of your amazing insight and everything that you do for the world. So, thank you.
And thanks for your advocacy, man, and thanks for using your platform.
Appreciate it.
All
I'll
right.
talk to you soon.
Talk
Bye.
to you soon. Bye.